And if success depends on a few exhausted leaders, I like to say it this way, you're one burnout away from a breakdown.
This is the Leaders Rising podcast. Creating bigger futures, building thriving cultures. We believe you can become a leader worth following.
I actually heard a great thing this week. It was Simon Sinek and Trevor Noah. They were talking about like small talk and how important it is. And Simon Sinek was saying how he hates small talk. And Trevor Noah says, I used to hate it. And then I read research that small talk is what makes for better big talk because it's where we create the commonalities, rather than just jumping to who are you going to vote for? We talk about, well, hey, it's been rainy in my yard. It's been rainy in your yard too. And so the small talk really matters.
But you're a human.
Yeah, exactly.
Imagine that. There's a great YouTube video with the two of them. It may be the same one, but I also think they're really good friends, so they just naturally land together, talking about the power of deep friendships.
Those don't happen by accident.
Yeah. And the whole Simon's line is the genuine bro version of I love you. Not like, love you, man, but the serious, genuine version of that. I think I incorporated that into my course.
I would even say that's true of my best friend. We've done a lot of really big life things together, but the thing we really appreciate is that we've just done a lot of life together, right? A lot of time around fire pits and back patios and kids swim meets and all that kind of thing. That's where friendships are built.
Well, speaking of swim meets and summertime, we're headed to a swim meet tonight. What's big summer plan in the Level House?
There's probably two things that are like grabbing all the headlines these days. Is this is our first summer without kids at home, and so they're off doing their own things, but there's also like at least every 48 hours FaceTime check-in, so we get all the updates about their summer jobs and summer plans. And our oldest, it's her first real grown-up job after college, so lots of fun things. I spent more time this summer talking about insurance than I expected, but those are part of the things. For us, though, I think a big fun thing is my wife and I recently celebrated big decade kind of birthdays, and we've been planning for years on this trip with my wife and her twin sister and her significant other. And so excited for some European travel this summer.
Nice.
Which for me really means I just want to eat a lot of really good food.
And walk a lot of steps to work off.
I'll get my steps in. Yeah, we've been slowly ramping those up like on a weekly basis just to make sure we're ready.
It's great this season to shift gears, to look at things differently and reframe. Both of us being married to educators, our season of life is a little bit different. Younger kids, a middle schooler and elementary schooler at home. But with a teacher home from school, then she's just, it seems, shifted into chauffeur, because at the ages that our girls are, 10 and 13, they are wearing us out. In fact, I just had to tell the middle schooler, no, unfortunately, I can't take you to a friend's house because I'm on this podcast with Jeff right now.
Yeah. It's funny. I just saw a friend of mine share something on Instagram this morning, and it was, she was right out of college, and she's like, what do you mean I don't get a summer break? Because she had to start her real job. And I know most of our listeners, you probably don't get a summer break, but I hope that you do find some time for intentional downshifting this summer as well.
Well, the way that we break down our year, you and I have worked on a focused project. We called it a sprint the last 30 days or so, but now the next 100 days is work focused. We've set our goals. In fact, as soon as we hang up this podcast, we've got our check-in with our ops director, Courtney, to go over our goals, see how we're doing, see how we're making progress. But one of the interesting things with how we've set up the year is that instead of the traditional quarters, which seem to not fit any sort of rhythm or expectation, we've set up 100-day blocks. And so 100 days at the early part of the year, then we had that sprint window. And now this 100 days, the next 100 days goes from Memorial Day to Labor Day, which in our world, in your world, it's just a very different pace. And we've got long weekends and a Friday off here and there. There's a lot of holidays and some travel, some vacation, spending time with the people who matter most to you and I, kids, family, travel, as you mentioned, going fun places around the world. And so that change of pace, shifting gears, literally as we talk about gear shifting, is so important for us to spend time, acknowledge it. And also when we take that time, I have to imagine, knowing you, Jeff, when you head to Europe, you're going to be unplugged. We're not going to hear from you. And our team knows that. We've established that. We're going to respect that. In that gear shifting over the summer, over the next 100 days, what have you seen in our clients and how their gears shift in terms of work and productivity versus family, relationship, vacation time?
It's always fascinating to me because we work with people from so many different industries. And so one of the things I love to learn about a client early on is what are their natural rhythms? When are the busy parts of the year? When are the slower parts of the years? And most clients say we never have a slow part of the year. But for each individual team, right, there are rhythms. There are times that are busier or slower. And, understanding here's what I love. Like our best clients, like they understand the rhythms and they're intentional about them. I think that's part of what we're going to talk about today is like, are we intentional or are we accidental? Are we building something on purpose or are we just reacting to whatever's happening around us? I think even rhythms are a good example of that. You and I'm sure we've talked about how like, as young parents, there's always when you have that first kid that you bring home, the first baby, the baby doesn't sleep when you want it to sleep or doesn't sleep when you used to sleep. Like, so one of the things they teach you as an early parent is sleep when the baby sleeps, right? I think that's the thing we've learned in our world is when clients are less busy, we should be less busy as well. Typically there's fewer demands on us in the summer as people tend to scatter and teams are a little more dispersed and things like that. So even though the client facing slows down, I don't know that our work slows down. We just are more intentional about building systems behind the scenes, pouring into our team and gearing up for what we know will happen when everybody is back in late August and early September.
And we kicked off a new project, 6-month project with a client about 6 weeks ago. And in the first meeting, we said, hey, let's set aside some time when everybody's in the room together to look at the calendar for the next 6 months. So that was a kickoff in May. We were looking at June, July, August, September. I thought, oh my gosh, how hard is this going to be for us to get 14 people plus 3 from our team all galvanized around the right timeline and rhythm? And you know what? It worked. We got the dates, we got it set aside, we fit it in, and
it's got to be intentional, right?
Exactly.
Another thing I would say, just to anybody listening to this, is you won't find Aaron and I, being advocates of the hustle culture and just work harder all the time. That's not us. If just working harder doesn't mean you're working smarter.
Well, I think to set up our conversation today, I'll say this to help us transition into a little bit more intentional, deeper conversation. But so often people will hear conversations like the conversation we just had about vacation and kids and family and the inner circle relationships in our lives and think, oh, well, there's not place for that at work. We've got to keep home at home and work at work. But the reality is we bring home with us. It's on our minds. It's on our shoulders every day when we come into work. And we're taking work home with us because it's on our shoulders, running through our minds at the end of the day. And so we've got to consciously shift gears, be intentional about that to make sure that as we're walking day by day, we're bringing the best that we need to each person, whether that's a kid, a significant other, a family member, or a team member at work.
Yeah, I think that's a truth that our generation recognizes that maybe other generations have at least hoped wasn't true, is that we can just compartmentalize things, right? And yet all those compartments show up in all the places. Your kids can tell when you've had a bad day at work, or your spouse, or your best friends. And the people at work know when things aren't going well at home. We can try to compartmentalize it, and sometimes you just got to show up and do the thing. But, this is about being whole people. We want to be able to show up as our whole selves and our best selves in all those places. And, that's why it's not enough to just hire great people, is because life happens to all of us. And if you've ever felt like you're doing all the right things, you're hiring great people, you're launching all the right plans, you've got all these great ideas, but things still aren't going the way you hoped they were in your workplace or for your organization. Maybe the leadership pipeline isn't growing, or the culture's got these gaps in it that you can't solve. We get it. In fact, that's what we're going to talk about today. And we have galvanized some thoughts over the last year or two as we worked with our clients into something we call the Leadership Manifesto. And it really boils down to 6 simple things that have changed how our clients grow, how they invest in their people, how they shape their culture, and how they scale their business over time. And so our Leadership Manifesto is what we're going to talk about today.
Well, let's dive right into that. Most of our clients have smart people. They've hired really great team members. I love the idea of a manifesto. It's something that I've taught to individual leaders, to college students, to young people. Hey, come up with your own personal manifesto, because the manifesto is about motivating, about energizing, about focusing on what's good and right and true. So we want this to be liberating, optimistic, positive, but spend just a minute, Jeff. Walk us through what this came out of and where we see the challenge, where things are going wrong, to help us know, why do we even need a manifesto?
Right. Well, it is true in our work. Oftentimes people call us because something's not working, right? Like or we're building something good and we've got a good thing going, but we want to make sure it's sustained. And so this manifesto really was built out of what do people get right when this all goes right, and we create the future that we hoped we were creating, when our business becomes what we hoped it was becoming. What went right in those moments? I think a lot of manifestos tend to be complaints, or tend to be, here's what everybody's doing wrong. That's not our worldview. That's not how we see things. And so we said, here's what great leaders get right about growth. And it really is about, we don't just let things drift, but we design a future. We design the culture that we're trying to build. We want to make sure that our leaders aren't stalling out, but that we're developing, and that the company is scaled in a way that's sustainable. I mean, most companies want to be growing, but if you've ever been in a company that's growing but not sustainable, it becomes like, there's a bottleneck, and people just get you try to squeeze more and more out of the same number of people. And so our manifesto is really about, how do we build systems that are simple, scalable, sustainable, and then how do we live by that over time?
The system approach is really crucial. And I think there's an intersection here that you'll hear us talk about on a lot of episodes, that there's a structural side to a system, but then there's also the relational people side to the system. And I think so often we separate those two. So behind the why of the manifesto, how do we intersect those two worlds to give us a structure that really brings the best out of every person on our team and leverages the strengths in a positive way?
I think that's a tension that a lot of leaders face. Like if we systematize things too much, we are, we're avoiding the people part, or we're, not caring enough for our people. Or if we, lean too far on the people side, then we're not building a system that's sustainable. And that really is a tension that, strong leaders, growing organizations have to learn to live with. I'd say it's not a problem to solve, it's a tension to maintain, and just recognize that both things can be true and need to be true. If you've got smart people and great people and you've got good plans, you've got to find a system that can continue to sustain those things. If you think about your body, it's got all kinds of systems. And if one of those systems gets out of whack, if your digestive system gets out of whack, that can lead to a bad day. But if your cardiovascular system gets messed up, that's not just a bad day. That can be, a bad season, and you've got to really pay attention to it. And so recognizing we're not just talking about one system, but that there are a number of systems that organizations have to pay attention to make sure things stay healthy and that people are getting the care and the growth that they need. And we talk about a people system, but really what we're talking about is, how are we developing our leaders? How are we, making sure that our culture is living itself out, not just, conference room walls, but also in frontline workers, and when decisions are hard and when managers are having team members who don't get along. Like that's where culture really shows up. And so, the pain of a system that's not sustaining culture, and that our manifesto talks about, it shows up in all kinds of places. If leadership is thin, if culture's unclear, if you as the senior leader are still in too many rooms and too many decisions and too many meetings, that's the kind of stuff we're talking about.
One of the places where I've found this challenge lies is in the tension of growth, which is positive, with the expertise that the founder, owner, executive has, and the struggle with handing that off and developing that rhythm of, how do we expand my own personal capacity as we're growing as a company? And so often it's easier to hold on to things, or it feels easier to hold on to them than it is to hand off or flesh things out. And I think that's really what the manifesto is about, is how do we put the right support infrastructure around each person, each leader, each executive, to make sure that they are growing, as we talked about at the outset, because they are a whole person. They are not just Executive Joe or Executive Jane. They are a whole person. They have a life. They have family and friends and a network outside of work. And so that manifesto is really about caring for the whole person out of the motivation of building a thriving version of the whole business.
Yeah. We use the mountain climbing metaphor a lot. And I think a lot of leadership development is where, senior leaders feel stuck at the top of the mountain, right? And then they say, hey, y'all, I need some help up here. Come on up, and hope that if they just, say enough things loud enough, long enough, that people will come up and join them, rather than, again, going back down the mountain, developing people, showing them how to climb, and, leadership development, culture development isn't just an event. It's not just say it again, but louder, but it's really, coming down to the level of the people that you're trying to develop, and building a system to help them learn to climb. Really, I'd say that's what's behind the Leadership Manifesto. It's about naming what holds teams back, holds leaders back, and how to build something better. Maybe that's the point where it's just good to walk through it, Aaron. Should we dive into the 6 truths?
I was going to say, let's stop dancing around this manifesto and talking about a manifesto. What is the manifesto,
leave them wanting more,
Jeff?
Aaron. Leave them wanting more.
Yeah, take us through it.
Well, most of the time, most leadership, all the training, all the culture stuff, it fails because it's reactive, not strategic. And we just kind of hope that things are going to grow. But we would say that leadership is really about compound interest. It's about, you can't build it in a day, but you can build it every day. And so there are some mistakes we see and a better way to do things. So why don't we just walk through all 6? There's 6 points. Why don't we tag team our way through them and just add a little color commentary along the way? The first part of our leadership manifesto, first idea, and we talked about this in one of our other podcast episodes, and we're actually going to do an episode on each one of these things. But the first one is that training doesn't build leaders. And I know you've probably sent people to leadership training or a conference or whatever, but training doesn't build leaders, systems do. Too many companies treat leadership like it's an event, and our take is that we want you to build a process that compounds. Really, training is about, it's more like the spark. Like, the training is helpful. It can be a spark that kind of lights something, but if it's just an event, that's not going to sustain itself over time. We need a system that follows up and that creates the rhythms and the routines and the check-ins and the feedback that help sustain that kind of leadership.
Yeah, back in episode 1, when we talked about the difference between a retreat and building an ongoing system or process, that's really what this is about, because it's not about a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, get your certificate and you're done. It's really about a learning and development journey that truthfully never ends. We can't graduate from this kind of leader development. Primarily, especially here we are in 2025, the world is changing so rapidly and so fast around us. We've got to constantly adapt our own leadership skills and abilities to match that. And so thinking about how do you break down into micro learning and small moments? We talk about formal time versus informal time. Are you scheduling a 30-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute session, or are you stopping by, grabbing lunch on a whim and having that developmental conversation? It takes both kinds. It takes the small and the longer term. We've got to build all of that into the system to really bring the best to our training.
Yeah, we've got to, and again, there's that informational blast, there's the training, but you also need coaching, you need apprenticeship, you've got to come alongside people. So you're not just giving them content without transformation. And again, we could talk about that for a whole episode. And in fact, we did.
Go back to that one in episode 1 on the Learning Center, your favorite podcast platform. Let's jump to the second point in the manifesto. Hope isn't a leadership pipeline, strategy is. I think this is so true in so many situations, and I've felt it myself, that we think if we just invite them into this situation, if we give them all the resources they need, it'll just happen. There's no magic wand. We have to be intentional at every step of this, at every level of expectations, and making sure that we're setting the stage, not just wishful thinking, but truly dialing in our intention day in, day out, with everybody on our team.
Yeah, that's certainly a mistake I've made in my own leadership journey of hiring great people, high potential people, giving them meaningful projects to work on and just hoping they'd get it, right? And go get it. And while they could often get results, oftentimes they would end up frustrated because I wouldn't provide enough clarity, or we didn't have an ongoing check-in system, or we didn't have a way for teams to connect with each other in a meaningful way. So, I have certainly trafficked in hope, and I think hope is we all need hope, but hope isn't enough to build us, to get us where we want to go.
One other thought on this front. One of our clients, Anna's mentioned a book, a principle, a philosophy that they operate on, and it's a developmental philosophy. And I think the idea of identifying who we have, building a process, and creating that bespoke, customized game plan for each individual to develop, while the team is also developing and the corporate entity is developing. That's so important. And that's what Anna's built in their business. She's intentional about it. But the principle comes out of the idea that so many corporations just throw a bunch of people into a room to see who performs best. And they give them a rotation. They try some things out, see who fits, see who doesn't. And if you make it, you can stick around. But if you don't, it probably wasn't actually your fault.
Yeah, we have another client that says, there's no bad apples, just bad strategies and bad systems, which is a provocative thing to say. And I kind of like that about her. One of our tools is the intentional multiplication plan. Like, do we know who we're trying to develop? Do we know when we're going to do it? Do we know what it is we're trying to get them to do? And if we can't answer that question, we don't have a system. We just have some hope and we have some ideas. We need a plan.
You know what those words remind me of? Writing a paper in 4th grade.
When are we ever going to use this again, teacher? When you're leading things.
We are. And I think that's important to highlight, that who, what, when, where, why, how. It seems so elementary, but it's so critical. And that's a part of our growth plan journey, our growth tool, helping people define where are you going to find accountability? When are you going to do this? What are you going to do? Who are you going to bring along with you? And so much of that is important to building the strategy, and hope is not that strategy.
Well, let's look at the next part of our manifesto. Number 3 is you don't hire culture, you build it, and you build it every day. There's a bazillion ideas out there about what culture entails. In fact, I just did a whole series on LinkedIn about culture isn't what you think it is. Culture isn't a mood. What it is it's a system of language, of trust, of accountability. It's what we build. It's how we do things around here. And it's what happens when things go wrong. Every culture has gaps. Every culture has places where we're not doing what we hoped we would. And that's normal. But what happens in those moments is a big part of culture as well. So culture really is about, in your company, in your team, in your organization, what's getting repeated, what's getting celebrated, what's getting reinforced. How do we do that? If you have been talking about your culture, maybe your values or your mission or the goals that we have, if you're saying it so often that you're really, really sick of it, you're probably just starting to do it enough that it might be being absorbed into the members of your team and in those you lead. I know times when I've been a senior leader in organizations, like it feels like you're just repeating yourself every time. And I know in every meeting, every town hall, every time we gathered the group around the tables, I try to make it an intention of like, we're going to at least talk about one of our values or one of our goals or one of the things that we, is tied to our mission, so that on every touch point as a senior leader, you're reinforcing that. Just because we think you're awesome here and we hired great people, we don't automatically expect that how that plays out. We want to provide clarity. If you're a leader in an organization, I heard another person say it this way, is that no matter what your job title is, one of your titles should be Chief Clarity Officer. You're the one who's making it clear. Here's what we're about, and here's how we do it, and here's how you succeed. This is what a win looks like today. And that's how you build a culture every day. You can't do it in a day, but you can do it every day.
I think that's so true. Every day, one thing. Anytime in any of our tools, when we say there's a list of 5 things or 4 C's in this tool or 5 P's in that tool, until you've spent a lot of time with a concept like that, I always forget one. And it's the same thing with values or any sort of principle or statement or guideline that you're trying to follow. We just intuitively forget part of this unless we really drill it into our minds. All right, the 4th one, heroic effort is not a sustainable growth plan. Tell me, Jeff, why does this resonate true for you at the end of our last 30-day sprint that you and I have just wrapped up?
Well, I think you and I showed up in some heroic ways in the last 30 days, and we did definitely sprint. But again, that's not sustainable because I'm tired today. No joke. And if success depends on a few exhausted leaders, I like to say it this way, you're one burnout away from a breakdown. If Aaron Lee burned out today, Leaders Rising Network would be in trouble. I think the same would be true if I burned out. And so we need to make sure that we're not relying on heroic effort, but that we're developing a team that can sustain those efforts. And one of my sayings is that I actually spent a lot of time in my early career with high school and college students, and we did a lot of things, a lot of games with duct tape. But your top performers shouldn't be human duct tape. If you're just relying on a few people to hold some things together, you're one problem away, one bad day away from some big problems. And so systems really can help you begin to sustain growth. And it's normal, especially in early days of an organization or, in a startup mode or in a sprint season. Heroic effort is okay for a moment. And sometimes we need heroes to solve a problem or to get a goal across the finish line. That's okay. But if that's the plan, if that's the hope, if that's how we always get things done, we know there's a better way. And we know that that's not sustainable. And so we want to help organizations and leaders build systems of sharing ownership, creating resilience, and building capacity over time. And there really is a way to do that.
All of these pieces are interconnected. I'll go back again to our initial conversation about our summer rhythm and schedule. And I remember saying to you, the Thursday before school ended, we were coming up towards the end of our sprint. And I said, man, I just feel like I'm running at a high level really fast, and I don't know how to slow down. And what it took was we were traveling for a few days. I said, you know what? It'll be fine. I'm going to set the out of office. I'm not going to think about this. And it just took that, in a way, a long weekend to reset my mindset. And I think so often work and productivity versus rest, it's another whole episode we could have a conversation about. It really comes down to you shifting gears appropriately and making sure you have something left in the tank to give. A heroic effort can last for a little while. You can sprint for a little bit, but you can't sprint your way up Mount Everest. Yeah. All right, Jeff, number 5 on the manifesto, your business won't grow faster than your people.
Yeah, that's right. We have a tool called the Maximizing Team Performance Flywheel, and it is all the things that go into how businesses grow. But at the beginning of it is really about, are your people growing? Are your people healthy? Are we communicating well? Do we trust each other? All of our growth hinges on the capacity of our leaders. We all want a bigger thing, but we've got to have bigger containers to carry the bigger thing, which is really our people. Usually, most organizations, as we grow, run into bottlenecks. There's too few people that know the things that make it happen. And so they've got to figure out how to hand off some of those things to other people. And that really does come back to a leadership problem. We have to continue to figure out what is it that I'm holding on to that I need to hand off, and not just throw at somebody else, but really develop in them. And we've got to be the ones who take ownership for developing our people. If we want our business to grow, we're firmly convinced, because we've seen businesses get this wrong. You can grow a business without your people, but you're going to break your business if you do that, if that's your approach. If you grow your people with your business, the sky's the limit, and there's a bigger future waiting to be had. You raise the ceiling by raising your people.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples of this is a growth-oriented business that was really winning awards. They were doing everything right, and the challenge just came down to growing the people. And when they slowed down for just a minute to grow their people, the growth happened on the people side, and the business growth picked right back up to go along with it. But they were able to do so much more. It's really that idea of multiplication that we talk about, that we truly have to multiply. We can't just add, and we surely can't subtract or be divisive if we want to grow. But multiplying our people is how it flourishes.
There really is a theme in all these, and I know you're going to take us to number 6 here in just a moment, but really this is about, are we being accidental or intentional with the way we're growing our business, with the way we're growing our people, with the systems that we're creating? There's a lot of accidental growth that happens. And again, that can feel fun, that can feel exciting, that can definitely fill a bank account for a time. But we play the long game, and we help companies who realize, there's a bigger picture that we need to be paying attention to here. And that's where these all come from, is if you want to play the long game, if you want to get this right in the long run and not just leave a trail of people behind you who are burned out, this is what you get right.
Yeah, I read a statistic last week, and we'll drop this link in the show notes. There is a researcher who's studied high-performing teams who have lived out the principles that we talk about here in the manifesto. She shifted her career from research to financial advising, and she built a fund around the companies that perform at the high bar that she was expecting, the great companies that she ran across in her research. And they outperformed the S&P 500 over the last decade plus. It's remarkable what can happen when we do truly focus and slow down, because these probably aren't headline-making companies. Maybe even some of them you've never heard of, and you don't realize they're right down the street from you, but they're really doing well by their customers, doing well by their people, and making a difference.
It's good. Well, let me give you number 6, and I'll tag you to tell everybody what it's about. Information doesn't create transformation. Execution does. And you're a guy who knows something about execution.
Yeah, I've been wrestling this year, almost shying away from telling people that I'm trying to read as many books as I'm trying to read this year. And part of that comes from last year. I read, like, I could count on one hand. Didn't read a whole lot last year. So I was like, you know what? It's audacious, but let me aim for, on average, 1 book a week this year. And it feels like so much information. I'm taking it all in. I'm digesting it. It's helping me think. So it's helpful in a way. But really what I've noticed is that's not what's creating the transformation in me. It's the notes I'm taking. It's the conversations you and I are having. It's the conversations I'm having with somebody else. I met a good new friend, Pat, a couple weeks ago. He and I got introduced by somebody I went to college with who said, hey, you and Pat should connect. We did, and it was the most enlightening 30 minutes, fed in part by the information because we had something to talk about and we could wrestle with it. But the information itself is not what's going to get it done. It's not how many books we read or how many training programs we go to. As you and I joked on episode 1, it's not how many conference notebooks are collecting dust on your bookshelf. It's really about how are you putting this into action? And the action is key because that's where the execution happens. It's not about excitement and energy and inspiration. It's about translating a thought, an idea into a behavior that we put into practice. And when we do that repeatedly and intentionally, rooted in our culture, built out of this manifesto, that's when the transformation happens.
We love to use visual tools because we think they stick and they can, they're easier to show up again and again in people's minds and in conversations. And yet I'm always concerned when the first few times we start to share some of those tools with people. Hey, are they just going to take this as like, here's a good idea for today? Or do they begin to use these tools in regular rhythms and regular conversations and regular ways of thinking about how our business does things? Again, knowing a thing is almost useless unless we do something about it.
So how do you see, as Leaders Rising Network president, how do you see the manifesto translating into day-to-day? Like, what does this manifesto mean to our clients?
Yeah, it's interesting because you and I have been doing this work for years now, along with others on our team. And I think for a while, these ideas, like, they were kind of floating around our minds and we kind of recognized them intuitively. And just over the last, year or two, have we begun to flesh these out and recognize and name, here's what our clients that get this right are getting right. And that's where this manifesto came from. And it makes me think of really one, I could name several clients that have used these ideas, but one of our clients was a big engineering firm. They had all the right pieces. They had a big vision. They were growing. They'd been around for a while, but, they had a new CEO that was really making things move forward with some innovative ideas. And, they were at a point where they were buying up their competitors. They had been number one in their market sector for a while, and they bought up the people under them, which is a power move and an exciting thing. And except for, that's a lot of growth in a short amount of time. And what the bottleneck that they ran into was it was too much depending on too few people. And so, okay, let's just send some people to training. Let's teach them some new techniques. Let's, make sure our managers have the latest tips and tricks for leading meetings and all that kind of stuff. And mostly they just spent a lot of money on conferences with stuff that didn't stick. And at the end of the day, the key decisions still were landing on the CEO's desk. He was in every meeting. He was in every decision. And he would tell you now, these days, he would tell you some of that was on him and his own growth journey and being willing to let go of things. But, it was exciting times. There was a good culture. They were hiring lots of people. People wanted to be there, but it wasn't repeatable. Nobody could tell you, here's the thing that is making us the place people want to work, and what growth, what's making our growth work here. And so, we used a lot of the ideas that we've shared in the manifesto here and helped them begin to build a system. Really, it was, again, moving from, we've accidentally arrived at this growth point and we didn't have a plan, and now we're going to systematize it. We're going to get intentional. We're going to build a system. They created some monthly coaching rhythms for their key leaders and for high growth people. They wanted to make sure that they took these high potential, mid-level leaders and helped them become managers, which wasn't really just about learning tips and tricks, but it was like, hey, do you all know ways that you build your influence? And do you know ways that you undermine your influence? Do you know yourself so that you can lead yourself in healthier ways? One thing they were great at is they had a pretty consistent meeting and rhythm culture, but it was just about the projects we're working on and task lists and stuff like that. And they realized, in some ways, that's counterproductive if it's not actually elevated. If every meeting we go to is just, checking off a task list and not actually elevating our culture. So they were really good at infusing their regular meetings with culture development or leader development. It was always a tool, always a culture principle, always a value, some way of infusing what we say matters most into every touch point. And then finally, they systematized, here are the 10 tools we want everybody in our organization to know about, to be able to speak about, to rely on a regular basis. And so taking these ideas of making it intentional, making it a system, not just hiring great people, but developing them. I think they could tell you a great story about all the ways that they're continuing to grow and develop. But probably my favorite story of it is that the CEO dug out his kayak. It had been up in his garage. It was stuffed full of a bunch of other stuff he was storing. And it had been years since he'd used it because he'd never had time to do it. But he actually began to stop working on weekends. He dug his kayak out. He taught his son how to kayak. Those are the kind of things that I think the work we do, when we go back to where we started our conversation today, we're real humans, right? We don't just show up to get work done. We're trying to build a life as well. And the way we do our work really impacts the way we get to do our life. And so that's why this manifesto means something to me. And I think it means something to him. I know it means something to his son. And that's why we do the work we do every day, Aaron.
I think that's a great point. And we talked about this on episode 1. We have to slow down to speed up. And speeding up doesn't just mean working harder, but we do have to intentionally slow down and work at a different pace, work at a different rhythm. And part of that is being a human. And I love those stories and examples from that CEO and his son. Tom talked about it on episode 4. Just great stories all around from our team, from our clients, in how this manifesto gets put into practice. We say hope isn't a leadership pipeline, but I hope that all of you here, there is hope in this manifesto. There is hope. If you feel like in my kayak or whatever your version of the kayak is, I hope you know that there is a way to dig that out. There is a way to get back to enjoying some of those simple pleasures in life that feed you as a person. And that's really our motivator, what's guiding us so that all of us not just accomplish great work at work, but that we can be whole and complete people all the way around.
Yeah, I think that's what gets us out of bed every day, right, Aaron? We love the human side of what we do. We always say it's not just business, it's personal. And if you're listening to us today and you're thinking, man, I wish this was all true in my organization. I wish I could help us do this kind of thing, or I wish my boss would listen to this. I mean, you're welcome to send them the episode. And always a good place to start is just with you, right? And you're not behind. You're just early in the shift. We all have a place of, we have to realize the thing before we can begin to take steps on it. And so we'll share the manifesto again with you. Maybe it's a good way you can use it as a reflection activity after you listen to this, and just think about, where are we at on each of these things and what's a meaningful step I could take in the coming week or month or season.
And plenty of episodes to come unpacking each of these one.
Yeah, we're going to break them all down practically. We'll tell you stories. We'll show you how people get it right.
All right, Jeff, let's wrap up with our traditional question. What's one bold step a leader can take after listening to this, hearing our manifesto? How do you put this into practice?
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming, can't it? There's so many ideas there. We see so many different things that maybe we could do or should do. And I always say, don't shit on yourself. But here, if there's one thing, one bold step, I'd say build one system, or just do one thing. Pick one meeting, one decision, one rhythm, and begin to do it in a way that invites others into it. You're developing others. You're not just informing them. You're not just telling them to do the thing. But that's really how it starts. That's how this whole thing starts, is we just have to flip the switch on getting intentional, not just about me getting stuff off my plate, but about developing and building others up. Build one thing. That's the bold step.
Awesome. Well, check out the manifesto. It's on the homepage of our website. We'll unpack this in the show notes at leadersrisingnetwork.com/podcast. Jeff, I hope it's a great life-giving summer for you. For those of you listening, I hope it's a great life-giving summer and season for you. Take a little time and spend time with those who matter most to you this summer.
Right. I hope you can all have a kayak moment this summer.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Leaders Rising Network podcast. Connect with us on LinkedIn or visit online at leadersrisingnetwork.com.